So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. I hope you've had a very nice and entertaining session before. So we are going to start in with 5 minutes delay, but I'd like to give you a preview of what we are going to talk about. So we are going to talk about values and attitudes in the police. And this is a topic which is very important and which has to be considered from different views and perspectives. It plays a very important role both in the police and for us as a society. So again, we are going to talk about value resilience, stakeholders, especially among the police. So strengthening of ethical integrity within the police forces and the tasks of the management. I'd like to welcome to this stage. Well, first of all, my name is Nila Klaas, and I'm a moderator, and I will moderate this panel. So the members of the panel, Ms. Stefanie Hinz, then Stefanie Kemme, professor at the Academy of the Police in Hamburg, Michael Leidenheimer, Institute for Training and Education at the University for Police of Baden-Württemberg. And we will have a lecture finally by Professor Thomas Mößle, who is a psychologist and professor for criminology and sociology at the Police University of Baden-Württemberg. And he will present some study results. He is the project leader of the project Values, and he will present the first interim results of the study, Development of Values and Attitudes in the Police of Baden-Württemberg. So first of all, let me introduce you to Professor Thomas Mößle, who is joining me to the podium. Thank you. I will be very concise. My speech will last 15-20 minutes, and I hope I will be able to convey the most important results of this study to you. Well, you see the first, the interim results. With the death of Floyd, not only in America, but all over the world, a debate on racism started. A lot of questions arose, especially in Germany, about racist attitudes, about discrimination practices within the police. And before that, there were chat groups with some expressions of racism, xenophobia, also here in Baden-Württemberg. So as far as Baden-Württemberg is concerned, I cannot but tackle this topic, and that's the reason for this study. The public debate about attitude and value models is characterized by extreme positions that make it very difficult to draw comparisons. There's a very strong polarization. Either there are attitude models or there aren't at all. So you have to take a differentiated approach. One of the reasons for this differentiated approach is that we do not have any data. There are no empirical insights about any factors or drivers for these attitudes. Some of them are very old, decades old. There may be only some sampling results or data coming from other regions. So there are no specific data as far as the police is concerned. So this is basically the situation, the starting situation that led to the initiation of the project in 2018, 2019. We carried out some surveys, although we could not use the same model that we use for population surveys, as the police forces are structured completely differently from the general population. So we focused on the approach to take to start this project, and the goal was to understand how values and attitudes have been evolving within the police in the long term. So the idea is to understand and describe the long-term training model to identify. One of the goals of the study was to understand whether we have a value erosion, and so we focused on a resource-based approach, considering that resources are very important in order to identify prevention measures. And so this is what we did in the study. We wanted to identify what resources had to be put in place in training the police. This is the design study, which is a bit more complicated. So here you see, in scientific terms, the consequence of design. It's a long-term study with regular surveys on practical experience, on personal experiences among students at different stages. So, for example, if you take the middle of this graph, so EBS, which are students, we interviewed them both in the beginning and at the end of the study, or the blue part, the blue bars, foresees different intervals for interviewing these people. So we did so because we want to see whether we have differences in the development of the values of these people, depending on the phase we interview these people. Then we have these we have considered the impact of the different training and education stages on the development of the values and attitudes of the respondents. For the sake of this presentation, I will focus on the red dots, and these are raw data referred to students who were interviewed at the very beginning of their training, so at the initial stage of their police training. And well, there are some people, well, the blue ones who already underwent training before becoming members of the police forces, but the yellow and the green are completely new. So we will see then the differences between these two groups. The first interview, well, as for the first interview, I can just give you some cross-sectional results. But as you can see in the left-hand side, we have pretty good results. And so we have a sound basis on the basis of which we can understand why these people have decided to join the police forces and how they changed their attitude over time. Here you see the data collection. We used online, standardized online surveys, and we have a feedback of about 60% because the interviews were carried out during the lessons. It's about 30 to 45 minutes length, and that's good, in my opinion. we did not measure all the parameters and all the variables at the same time, but the design was very good. After the practical phase, the internship phase, we rather focused on the more practical aspects of being a policeman or a policewoman. Here you see some of the main variables. They are divided into 6 blocks, theme blocks. In the boxes, you see some examples for the individual themes. So we have a block with democracy, and here you see the motivation for the job as a police, as a member of the police, or the motivation for becoming a member of the police. So, for example, loyalty or trust in the work performed by the police. Then another theme block was about values and attitudes, orientation, discriminating attitudes, and other examples that I will dwell on later on. Another block was about role plays. And so here we see authoritarian approaches, racism, and problems in terms of living in common. Then the theoretical and practical phases. Satisfaction, expected satisfaction, but we also asked other questions. And the last theme block is about resources. So we asked about their satisfaction, level of satisfaction, support by peers, by parents, and so on and so forth. So here you see the sampling results, and so here you see that we have 7 students who come from the standard education. So VS are those who immediately start working after university. You see also the different ages. So for EBS, as I said, they are 8 years older. But you see that within the group of the EBS, we have the lower number of women represented. Migration background is underrepresented in EBS. It is below. It is under 10%. And in general, we have 27.2% in terms of migration background in the German population. As far as the place of living is concerned, there are no differences among the different cohorts. We have introduced this question because this may have an impact on where these people are in service. So it depends on whether you were raised in Mannheim or in a smaller village. So this can have an impact on your future decisions. Then, well, you see the motivation for the police profession, and you see the differences. The theoretical and practical part will not be presented today because these data were collected later. The first 3 bars that you see, so the satisfaction and the values are relatively high because of the high quality of the sample interviewed. And for this reason, we used a measurement scale that already existed. And this is what we applied as a method. If we already had a measurement scale, we used it. Otherwise, we developed our own individual questions. You see the participants in the study, and this is in this case, we can see that our students are very similar to the general population. Then you see the values, negative quality. Also, in this theme block, we have no differences. Then the third block was the satisfaction with line. So how satisfied are you with your life? And our students have a much higher level of satisfaction than the remaining part of the population. We have a stronger difference, a higher difference if we correct the groups by age. Well, possible reasons for higher satisfaction could be because you have scholarships or you study on the job, or because the health, well, good health status is a prerequisite for becoming a policeman or policewoman. So again, we have a higher life satisfaction. The third level, the third sector, well, you see in this chart that the profiles are quite overlapping. In terms of profiles, we used the Shell model, and we asked people aged 18 to 25, and all the people had the chance of expressing their opinion on all these values that you can read in the slide. So the rating was between non-important and extremely important. So the question was about the most important thing in one's own life. You see that in the Shell study, we get to very similar profiles, and this is good. But we also have, in particular, very marked pro-social orientation. That is, the fulfillment of one's own requirement is less important than conformism, doing the same things as other, or sticking to one's own parameters is considered more important for our students. Well, the difference may be due to the different age structure, but I think this is quite significant, because usually the police authority is linked and is associated with traditional values or conservative values. But as you can see in the chart, this is not always the case. The same applies to political orientation. We used a series of questions from Hessen, and so we asked about their political orientation. In general, we have a very strong orientation to the right, to the center. But when we asked other categories of police professionals, we have some left orientation. The EBS group has a right orientation. We have so again, general orientation to the center, but with slight deviations to the right and to the left. On the left-hand side, you see that we have a similar distribution than for Hessen, and here we have some differences in terms of number of people interviewed. Then another theme block was the role of the police. What about the role of the police in the current society? You see that we have overlapping answers. Well, ABS and VS quite overlap. In general, we have this difference between the newcomers and those who have been in the profession for a longer time. And this difference can be seen across the entire sample. Why do we have differences in service providers? Well, this may be due to professional experience, or it may depend on the professional experience that they had prior to starting studying. And we will further investigate the reasons for such differences. Another aspect that we investigated is the image of the police in the society. In this case, we see violence vis-à-vis the police in the past few years and respect vis-à-vis the police. And you see that there has been an increase in all aspects. So violence has increased and respect too. Well, the professional experience doesn't play any role, although students have no experience at all. Well, the first practical phase a person may have experienced listening to the first stories or the first experiences in the police may have played a role, especially in violence. We see that there has been an increase which has been confirmed by data. What remains to be discussed are the reasons for this increase in violence, especially in the last few years when events have led to greater violence, and it's no wonder that data too are increasing. Now let's come to the last theme block. So discriminating attitudes and behaviors that can lead to xenophobia, for example. In particular, you see that in this respect, discriminating attitudes and behaviors, we have allowed respondents to estimate the percentage of discrimination versus vis-à-vis ethnic or cultural differences. The question was very broadly defined. We did not focus on xenophobia only, but what you can see among all the respondents group is that these discriminating attitudes and behaviors have increased among the population, and rather well, and actually more than within the police forces. And this is again, this is not a surprise when you ask the specific group. But I'd like to focus your attention on the two red circles for EBS. Well, we have a difference here. EBS are policemen and policewomen with a longer experience, and here you see that discriminating attitudes and behaviors among the police forces tends to be higher than for the rest, for the remaining respondents, and this may be due to the past experience. They can better judge. Another thing I'd like to mention is that discriminating attitudes in the police is considered as broadly disseminated. Between 30 and 40% of the colleagues think that 30 to 40% of the police forces have a discriminating attitude or behavior. Again, the last topic, group-related xenophobia. Well, in this case, we've considered the syndrome as a as the basics. So the devaluation of homosexual people and xenophobia, Sinti and Roma, etc. we added the discrimination against psychic diseased people. And we asked many questions about homeless, whether they should go away from pedestrian zones, and so on and so forth. In the chart, you see the positive answers to the various statements. And again, you see that the blue and the green line are quite similar, except for the Roma and Sinti, and for the homeless. EBS have much higher peaks, both for homeless people in Sinti and Roma. We also considered the red line with those with the students, and the yellow line represents the data from Hamburg with people who directly started the job. And as you can see, in these case, this category seems to be very similar to our situation. So the situation in Hamburg and in Baden-Württemberg is very similar. Again, you see the red circles with the EBS students with some peaks. One of the reasons may be sort of increase due to the continuous professional experience with the homeless, with Sinti and Roma people, and this may have had an influence. If you have never to do with a specific group, this can hardly have an influence on my attitude. But if you regularly have to cope with these groups of people, you tend to be more discriminating. And then we asked these people whether they have become more cynical, more resilient. In this case, we used another method. As you can see, policemen and policewomen admit they have become more cynical, but at the same time, they admit that they have become more resilient. Well, one of the reasons for recording these percentages is the professional experience, and this is something that we can see throughout all my slides. So what can we draw in terms of conclusions? Well, we've had feedback of 60% through our questionnaire, and this shows at least among the students and the trainees, this study is interesting, and as shown also through the remarks and commentaries that were written by them at the end of the study. So they think this is an important topic that should be further investigated. Well, as far as the trends are concerned, we can see that we have chosen a very good sample, and we've managed to develop a very good method that has led to a very sound database that we can further use and analyze. One of the main results of this study is that we have found some differences between the various professionals in the field, and this means that socialization is very important. However, we have to further investigate the reasons. Well, of course, the age, the sex and professional experience play a role in the differences between the different results. Here you see the people who participated in the project, although, by the way, 2 of these people are no longer within the working group. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Let's meet in the middle here on stage. Here are our colleagues who take part in this panel. Marvelous. Thank you very much, dear Professor Mößle, for this interesting presentation. So this creates already the framework to further discuss those topics. So today I am going to discuss together with Stefanie Hinz from the Academy of the Police in Hamburg. And she is also active in the Ministry of Interior Affairs. And she is also a key figure in the Baden-Württemberg region. So she deals with issues that are also transnational at a European level. So she studied political studies, public law, as well as modern history. So she is also a person with a strong legal background. Thank you very much and welcome. And then we are moving on with one of our guests who is not from Baden-Württemberg. As we said, we also have somebody who will represent the Hamburg area, Stefanie Kemme, as we said, together with Stefanie Hinz, representing once again the Academy of the Police. She is also a psychologist. Thank you very much for being here. And then we have Leidenheimer, who deals with those issues at the University for Police in Baden-Württemberg since 2014. And in the last 4 years, he has been dealing with the different values and attitudes in the police, and he is also coordinator of the format, including rabbis and other religious representatives in the police. And then we also have Professor Thomas Mößle, who is a psychologist and professor of criminology at the University of Baden-Württemberg. So thank you very much for being here with us. So let's start right from the beginning. So, dear Ms. Hinz, let's start with you. So we have talked about the challenges at the societal level in terms of resilience, actually putting at the heart of the discussion the different actors involved. So, value resilience. Can you comment on that? Yes, of course, those values have been put under pressure by a number of crises that are intertwined. As we said, 2020, the pandemic, so that was quite impactful, as we said, and then we've continued with the war in Ukraine, then inflation, financial and economic development at a geopolitical level. We have seen the development of other areas such as crime prevention or on cybercrime specifically. So this is obviously relevant for us as representatives of the police of the region of Baden-Württemberg. So we need actually to deal with all those issues. So how criminality and crime in general have developed over time, and how we can actually deal with other police-related aspects, such as the fact that we're not perceiving in a positive way sometimes. So we, as we heard from Professor Mößle, we have talked about topics such as respect. That is actually a subject matter of study in the societal context in which our fellow police officers actually perform their duties on a daily basis. So violence which can be verbal, which can be physical, and obviously these are all elements that are relevant for all our colleagues, and we can understand that as people. So our fellow police officers, our colleagues, are impacted strongly by crisis. For example, children who do not go to school, they need to stay home, they need to be taken care of. So once again, all those things that make the whole context less stable and less stable, as we said, depending on the different personal situations as well. They have always tried to be professional and perform their duty as best as they can. So they need to be praised for that. So how would you describe the police of Baden-Württemberg? Well, actually, a snapshot. This is obviously the best police corps that we could have. So, of course, our colleagues perform their duties in a super professional way. They are close to our citizens, so they are easily reachable. So we saw that throughout the pandemic, because we got positive feedback by the people who stated it's fantastic that you are there for us, that we can see you. For example, in public spaces where you can find different groups of people who gather, team up, especially in the warmer season. So they are perceived in a very positive way. We are close to our fellow citizens, as we said, and of course they focus on the fundamentals, on the fundamental values of our democracy, as we said. Protecting all the liberties that we enjoy. So in Baden-Württemberg, from the stats viewpoint, we can say that we've been successful in terms of crime prevention and crime management. So, of course, there's is an appraisal of the whole management of the land Baden-Württemberg, so the region. So, how do they go about their day-to-day life? So first of all, they actually need to study at university, and then they are introduced to the police. There are events, they can come with their families, and so they were included in the context. So it is already the first step in which they start maybe grasping that things get real. So their duty is to support and protect the Constitution, to be fair to one another. So this is their own personal duty, their own personal responsibility that they take on, not just for themselves, but also for their fellow colleagues, for the institutions, for police as an institution. And we have seen that time and again over today's discussions. And of course, any issues that are negative and any problems that might arise are obviously straight away projected onto the institution as a whole. So we need to also underline what is to be praised. So yeah. So the different values that are everywhere to be read, because this is something that you live every day. So how do you support all of this? Or is there something that actually represent a strong part of your everyday life? Yeah, well, actually, we don't show up every day to work and underline all of those, but our fellow colleagues move in a context in which they have to face and handle a number of legal issues in different events, for example, in different discussion formats. So they are reminded of all that. They are made aware of everything that is connected to those topics. Yes, so we have seen the first partial results presented here. So Baden-Württemberg, based on the studies of the Ministry of Interior Affairs, it's never taken part of this study that was presented here. Why didn't you as a region not participated? Well, actually, we said that we want to be part of this discussion, which is obviously important. So we need to have an empirical approach to that to actually make things more concrete. We don't have anything to hide. We're open to a transparent discussion. So, as we said, as we have heard time and again when talking about the attitudes, we are self-conscious, let's say. So, also considering the fact that our colleagues are trained through universities, for example, and they do not have any structural problems whatsoever in terms of odd behaviors, racist behaviors whatsoever. So those things are not tolerated at all. And in Baden-Württemberg, we also have staff representation. So, for example, when considering different topics, for example, data protection, so we actually negotiated all those aspects that you've heard presented. So we talked about the different university-related issues, and then how we can deal with all those topics in a very practical way. So analysis on the one hand, but also based on the results, we need to act. We want to further develop any possible actions wherever needed, so that we can support our fellow colleagues, for example, when they need anything in particularly challenging everyday life activities that might come up when they have to be active in our society. So they need to have a good perception of what they do and of themselves. However, this should not include any negative values or any degradation thereof. So that is the reason why we decided to go down that path. So Megavo, this study, so Hamburg was also a city that decided not to take part. So why was that? Actually, so in our city, we started off in 2019, 2020, and we analyzed the study, and we actually adopted the same perspective. We did that together with professors at the university, and we understood that this needs further analysis. So we developed formats with questionnaires like we heard and saw or explained by the colleague from Baden-Württemberg, even though we did not work together on that. So in general, we can say that the research on values and attitudes might have reasons that are anchored in the specific region, in the specific land. So that is the reason why, since we already have the tools to take all those aspects into account, we decided not to take a part. So, because a nationwide, a federal study would actually be less on point. Considering also the time frame that is to be taken into account when filling out the survey and so on and so forth. So we have studies, we have performed studies which are region specific. Therefore, we decided not to participate in the Megavo study. Thank you. Okay, let's move on from the theory to the practical side of things. So Dr. Leidenheimer, who actually puts forth their candidature to the police? Well, actually, there is a whole palette that's Gen Z. That's already to be established, quite easy to see. So people who rely on their phone for everything, people who socialize over TikTok or Instagram. So, for example, they do not have apps such as an app for the news. However, they are people who want to help each other out, who do not want to stick to a 9 to 5 office job. So, actually, this is connected to what we heard before. So they're probably left-winged and liberals rather than right-winged. And so fairness, as we said, legality, fairness also in terms of generational issues, the different crises that we talked about, the climate. So these are all topics that are recognized and acknowledged by our young fellow officers, which of course has a lot of pros to it. So also students who come from a family background which is connected to a migration story. So for example, so the picture is quite diverse and multifaceted. So they are also quite active when it comes to sports. So the typical Gen Z people. So obviously, taking all this into account, there are people who are automatically excluded because they don't think this is interest and they don't want to engage themselves because they don't want to risk their own life. They don't want to risk everything they have to protect their fellow citizens. So probably over the considering the overall spectrum, that's why we are probably oriented more towards left-winged people rather than right-winged, because they do support the democratic values such as mutual support and mutual protection. So you said that the police is actually a special actor. Uh, However, the police officers seem to be more satisfied with their life. How did we come to that? Well, actually, they are paid for the job that they studied for, which is obviously a little bit of an exception when considering the region of Baden-Württemberg and the rest of the country, and that plays a role. And then they're active in sports, for example, so they're physically active and they're super fit. So they have a fantastic health situation, and this contributes to the overall perception that they have of their own life. So probably this is the best description that I can give you. Well, actually, the training and the university studies do play in a role, and the fact that they do not show discriminating tendencies that we've heard about today. However, you also stated that older colleagues are a bit more cynical, and they are are a bit blunter, if you will. Yes, cynicism, all those aspects are interconnected, as we said. And as our colleagues already described, there are specific types that actually decide to embark on this journey, studying and working at with the police. So you can also see that considering the stats, and then in practice, you understand over time that maybe things might differ from your initial perception. And we take as an example the city of Mannheim, and we heard from the colleagues that it depends a lot on the background that you come from, where you studied, where you started working, where you build your contacts, for example, whether they are negative or positive. So the different values can be further developed in a number of ways. And we saw that in the EBS as well, and then the perception of the homeless population, and so on and so forth. So all those experiences do have an impact, do influence your perception. So, and then there are other areas in which those elements are not as important as in the police. So there are different concepts that were elaborated and embedded in the training curricula, in the training path. So they need to make positive experiences when they come across different people. And I don't know if you, dear colleagues, wish to further comment on that. Yes, we also utilize the tool in practical terms to study the aspects of dominance, for example, and punitive behaviors, for instance. These also had an impact in terms of gauging the attitudes within the police corps, for example. That was quite different in the past. So we draw this comparison between the data that we have and the data from the analysis of the society overall. So at the beginning of the research, we can't really state that the result will go in a predetermined direction. That is exactly the reason why we need to analyze everything. And then in another analysis, we actually established that all that we actually understood in theory is then further reconfirmed through the contacts that one might have. So either negative or positive, considering the different walks of life and the different parts of our society. So when they start off in the job, so they do have some values. So we do take authoritarian, for example, behaviors into account, how it will further develop. That is the reason why we need to continue on analyzing and perform researches on the attitudes that are displayed. Do you agree?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to see that we finally have results because, you know, previously in prevention, we simply tried and tested methods, but now we have evidence-based results, so we have concrete aspects to rely on. And I think the practical shock is very important. Police officers are usually in the weakest parts of society, and so they have to do with the lower part of the society. And I think the contact hypothesis can be further strengthened if we focus on positive contacts. In prevention, we already have put in place measures in this respect. For example, there are support measures with Roma, with refugees, because this shows that when police officers come into contact with specific groups of people, well, professionally, the experience they make is a negative one, unless they have had a positive experience in private terms. And this is something that we have to overcome. We hardly have time to intervene when police officers are working professionally, and so we have to focus on prevention. We have to start initiatives. Well, there may be different initiatives. For example, basketball with the refugees. If they played basketball with the refugees when during the training period, when they come across this group of people, then during their professional life, they may tend to have a positive opinion about that if the contact had been positive. So how slow or how fast do values change? Well, let's say experiences may be negative and positive. They may change over time. But what about the change in values? Do they change easily? Well, unfortunately, it's not easy at all, because values tend to remain constant over time. Well, this is confirmed by psychologists. But well, if if I'm patrolling and I see, for example, things that I would have never imagined to happen, I'm very much stressed, much more stressed than the rest of the population. If you do not have any prior experience, you are much more stressed, and that's why it is important to act in a preventive manner, because once you are in the situation, you can hardly recover. And this is the approach that we have to adopt. And then we also have to work on continuous education, on psychological support, on supervision. Well, these are just keywords that show how important it is to monitor the situation. We have a value compass, and we have a sort of basic attitude that we defend, and well, what we defined as our basic principles remain unchanged, but the circumstances may change in a matter of a few years. As far as the homeless is concerned, for example, we have done nothing so far, although there's a great need for intervention. With Roma, we did a lot, and so I hope we will obtain much better results in that sector, because a lot of initiatives have been put in place. And now we have, for example, a lot of new measures that have been put in place and that we could not implement previously because we had so many topics to deal with. Because, you know, you usually have 3 months of theory, of theoretical courses, but now things have changed and we have a lot of support activities. Well, you said we should create positive contacts, we should support coaching initiatives, but what about the routine of students? And what is the role of managers of the management level? What universities, for example, can do to foster the professional development of police officers? Well, managers play a very important role. They are very close to the colleagues. They provide guidance and they identify deviations and well, in contact, for example, with groups of population. So if they see that the wrong attitude, that a wrong attitude becomes established, they can correct that. They can foster, for example, chat groups and other initiatives in order to strengthen the culture of providing and giving back feedback so that colleagues know that they can resort to their managers if something goes wrong. So there must be a positive leadership culture, a positive leadership culture, but at the same time, we also have to focus on continuous education. What do our leaders need? There has been a sort of revolution in our police, and the data of the past few years are really have really become higher. That is, there has been a 40% increase in police officers since 2014, also to offset for people living. But we have to also to reflect upon what we have to do as an organization. We are becoming younger. We are becoming more numerous. The Gen Z topic has already been discussed, and so there are new issues and new questions that our leaders and managers have to be able to cope with. And so new offers have to be put in place to fulfill the requirements of these younger generations of policemen. They need to have the right amount of time to follow up the services so that they can talk about issues and themes. For example, if something difficult happens, there must be a dialogue between the leader and the officer. And this is very important. So again, the education reform is something that was initiated in order to create that space, that time for our colleagues to talk about these issues and topics. And I'm convinced that this can be also implemented in practical terms, a more pragmatic approach, reflection days, for example, after very stressful missions, after a couple of days, for example, so that with hindsight you can look back and you can process the events with a more neutral approach. Let me follow up. You said we need a good mistake culture. Do we have a professional mistake culture in the police? Because I would think with hierarchy, so the higher the hierarchical role, the more difficult it becomes to learn from the mistakes. Well, that's clear. And this is a constant task that we should take, also because things change over time. We have regulations with a lot of principles so that managers and leaders know everything and become the best in the world. We have to realize that this is no longer the case. We have a completely different image of our leaders, and the same applies to mistakes and the culture of mistakes. How do we deal with mistakes? This is a completely different approach than the one we had a decade ago, for example. In Baden-Württemberg, the police reacts very professionally to mistakes. We have developed a culture whereby mistakes can be discussed, and then clearly, if a severe mistake was made, for example, in case of discriminating or an extremist behavior, then measures have to be taken, both in terms of disciplinary measures and criminal law measures. But I think our police is reacting very professionally. And now let's have a look at Hamburg. What about your culture in terms of mistakes? Do you have a similar picture as in Baden-Württemberg? But this was a very important element in the study. Socialization plays a very important role, and with that, we do not only mean positive contacts and positive experiences, but also the leadership culture. It's important to create a context that allows me to create a sort of social identity within the police. The question is, how do we manage all this? Before the study, we said, of course, we wanted to investigate that issue, but then we realized that when things become difficult and critical, and when results may arise that do not mirror the entire organization, we have to interpret this data accordingly, because in that case, our personnel commission in Hamburg can intervene, and also the unions who support our officers can intervene. What I see in Hamburg with the students I talked to, well, I asked them who is interested in a leadership position. Women have rejected that possibility. Well, in the beginning, in the study, we had about 50-50 percentage, but then the higher the hierarchy, the lower the women share. And this is because of the culture. It's a profession or it's something for men, and women should not reach the leadership position. It's not necessary, and this is due to cultural reasons. Well, I don't know what the situation is in Baden-Württemberg, but as far as Hamburg is concerned, I can see that women are not very interested in getting a leadership position. Well, this could be a good topic for a panel maybe next year. Well, you mentioned the Minister of the Interior of Baden-Württemberg. He's basically one of the best leaders. Yes, well, this was referred to the error culture, but this is simply to say that we are striving, we are trying to use to become better. Well, but she said, she talked about a zero tolerance strategy for xenophobia and for women hostility in the police, and the drastic consequences have to be considered if these attitudes are used. So what about the consequences that you have in the police? Well, we follow exactly the same strategy that was formulated by the Minister of the Interior. we formulate the very same strategy in case of wrong behavior. We pursue a very clear and consistent strategy. After 2020, we introduced a very systematic strategy whereby any wrong behavior is immediately notified and reported to the relevant bodies. And as soon as behavior is relevant from a criminal law perspective, for example, if we had racist or discriminating attitudes, well, these cases are then transferred to the public prosecutor's office. An investigation procedure starts, and we have also agreed that an alignment has to take place with the public prosecutor's office because they have a decision-making process, and so we have to define the threshold or the limits after which the cases are transferred to the public prosecutor's office. If the case is not that serious, solutions are found within the same police authority using the approach of neutrality. Well, this, of course, works very well with the public prosecutor's office. We have seen that whenever cases are judged by the public prosecutor, we have a fair and just procedure. In these cases, together with the criminal law procedure, we have a disciplinary procedure which is started, and so that what has not been judged under criminal law is treated under the viewpoint of the disciplinary law. In Baden-Württemberg, especially among the trainees, we have trained specific resources who are able to assess these cases, and their decisions are then confirmed by the judiciary. But clearly, we have to realize that well, for example, in chat groups, you have to differentiate because in chat groups, there may be some people who did not actively participate in the conversations, in the discriminating attitudes. So participation is important, but these people may not even have perceived the discrimination. So as a police officer, we always say, you are responsible for the law, for the constitution, for the basic rights, and you have to become engaged. You cannot simply say, it's not my business and I don't care for that. This is something that we focus on, and this again is important for prevention. It's our task to raise awareness among the managers, among leaders, and among the new generations. Well, private life is one thing, but a professional life is a completely different thing. So whenever I act as a police officer, I have to behave according to the principles. But also in private life, I'm responsible for the organization, and I'm responsible for the trust of citizens vis-à-vis the institutions. Well, punishment is one thing, but what is really important is to raise awareness among young police officers, raise awareness about what they do. The communication through smartphone has become completely different. Right-wing extremism, for example, do not want to sweeten the pill, but we must say that it's a broad culture, and these are men who send that bad messages, and so we have to act in terms of prevention, and with prevention we have to focus on the team culture that evolves over time. If we want to change something, well, theoretically, it's nice to say that all police officers should engage in defending their values, and that's good to hear. It is, however, very important that when you see or read something, you have to react. But when exactly? Well, those who are in the chat group have to react immediately. So they have to react immediately and say, this is something you cannot say, so please stop immediately. It's the team spirit which is really very important in police, in the police authority. And you have to foster that culture of reciprocity. You look after the other. You can say, please don't do that, it's wrong. And then you have then to make harder decisions, so whenever the situation becomes serious. And afterwards, punishment. But first of all, you have to raise awareness. This is something which has to be disseminated among leaders, especially because they have no relationship with younger generations, and also because they take something for granted. They used to take some things for granted, but now situations have changed. And so whenever we manage to raise awareness both among the younger generations and the most serious, the most senior officers, we will be successful. And we have to act with prevention. And if anything goes wrong, then punishment takes place. Well, but you need also to have a strong personality in order to be able to react. And this is something that you can exercise. We have a concept for strengthening the personality, and since the very beginning, we have considered some user cases, and we say. We usually say, well, that's group work, and so you have to intervene if anything goes wrong. In that case and in that concept, people have to work first in group, and then there are, of course, reference people. We have a psychological support, and we have managers you can rely on. But first of all, you have to work in groups. Well, if we have to summarize, what is, in your opinion, the most effective preventive measure? What would you say? On the one hand, workshops among the groups, but the focus in that case is the very culture of the police authority, and then controversial coaching methods. First of all, for example, the use of police rabbis, especially in cases like circumcision, and so that a dialogue can start. I think these support formats can be really effective and successful because people realize that they hadn't a clue about a specific topic, but now they can react democratically. So it's again the strengthening of ambiguity tolerance. What about your experience in Hamburg? What lessons can we borrow from your experience? Well, the measure you mentioned is especially important. The fact of allowing groups to strengthen themselves autonomously. And well, it's not a matter of complaint management, but rather a matter of working in groups and strengthening the groups. I think it's the group that should regulate itself so that the members of that group can realize that they shouldn't violate the rules of the group, and that's very important. And then as far as I'm concerned, I always focus on supervision. This is a long-term issue for the police. I think we still have potential for making supervision more effective. It should become mandatory, and it should be properly regulated. And this is exactly what happens in other sectors as well. There's nothing standardized in this respect. No. No, there's nothing institutionalized. What about you, Professor? What about the most effective preventive measures, in your opinion? What has to emerge is that we want to foster a culture that is not ready to accept any wrong behaviors. And well, clearly there are different hierarchical levels. Well, of course, the students have to be guided by the higher hierarchical levels. At present, we are discussing the results concerning the differences according to the hierarchy level. Again, so we have to include the different levels. Leaders and managers must be included as well because they play a very important role as well. Well, as far as my students are concerned, well, what I always say that what increases one's own effectiveness and efficacy is very important. A prevention program is very important. So the fact of having a sports activity, being fit in the local club, being engaged in a football club, well, I do not want to focus on an individual preventive measure, but in general terms, you have to foster positive experiences that increase the feeling of self-efficacy. And for this reason, you are strong enough to say to another person that what he or she has done is not good. And this is something which is not available at present in the police because everything is managed at one single level. So just for the audience, we do not have so much time. But if you have any questions, please go ahead. But before we close, talking about leadership and leaders, what questions should leaders ask themselves in terms of supervision? That is, what should they do in order to be successful long-term leaders, especially vis-à-vis the new generation? Well, I should ask this question myself, but I could ask my colleagues as well. And that's why we are developing a new system of feedbacks in an anonymized form because, well, we talked about the importance of hierarchy, but we have to consider that every 2-3 years, all our colleagues undergo an assessment, and based on this assessment, they can have an improvement of their career. And so this can have an influence. It should be anonymous for this very reason. It shouldn't be mandatory, but we hope that our colleagues in a leadership position can use these results and embed them in the feedback culture so that leaders can better understand what they should do, how they should further improve the communication. And this is very important. In our university, there's also a very good institute for personnel management and development. And there we have a leadership level for all the people who are who have specific responsibilities. And we want to work on that level of leaders in order to develop a sort of role model program, because we have a lot of students coming to our university, and we want to avoid individual attitudes, because we want to develop the team culture and the team spirit. There may be other softer skills that are necessary, for example, social media management, sensitivity. And for me, it is very important to start a sort of exchange of views and opinions, formats that can be introduced at the level of police headquarters so that colleagues can network and exchange their views also with other stakeholders. For example, our students who study at a higher level usually spend one day in Stuttgart with other stakeholders, and this is extremely effective because when they spend one day at the History Museum, well, they get to know the history of the police, and that's important, but they can also see that whenever the police has not defended the basic rights and the constitution, negative consequences have happened. And this is very important because this fosters further discussions.
This is obviously a complex context, but we must communicate in a transparent way. Thank you very much to all of you. And let's check out the time and the audience. There is one microphone for that person